We've got an interesting day today. We've been looking through the whole history of the restoration of the temple, the restoration of Judah after the time of Cyrus the Persian, and obviously after the Babylonian exile. Now we're going to Baruch, and Baruch, according to the New American Bible Revised Edition, worked closely with Jeremiah, and Jeremiah was the prophet to Judah prior to the Babylonian exile. You'll understand, if you understand Jewish history, that the Babylonian exile is equally a key point, as well as the restoration, equally a key point to the history of the Jews, as much as preceding that was Exodus. So you have the Exodus, which is really where Judaism begins. We all know it begins with Abraham, and we all know it begins with the whole story. But we really understand, if you look at the history, it really starts with Exodus and the Exodus event, which is the story of at that point, the Hebrews, or Israel, being led out of Egypt into the Promised Land, and eventually, which was that 40-year period. So when we look at the history, we understand that the exile, which, by the way, is cited in the Bible, in the book of Matthew, as how important this is. The exile is just as key as the Exodus, and with the exile, we have afterwards the rebuilding of Judah. So we're looking at Baruch. Baruch worked with Jeremiah. Jeremiah was a prophet before and for a part-time during the exile. And so we're going back, but we're also coming from the same theme. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. We're here every single Monday through Friday, and our program drops right after midnight on your favorite podcast platform. Let other people know where they can find it, subscribe, make comments, and also pass the word. So we always look at what's going on in our first reading, or usually look at that, in light of what's going on in the world around us, and try to have a little fun in the process. I tend to be a little bit too serious sometimes, but in any case, here we are, and we're looking at this powerful message. And what we're seeing in today's reading from Baruch is that the people have announced that they have sinned against the Lord, that they turned against the Lord, and because they turned against the Lord and they followed their own way, they're acknowledging the Lord had no other choice but to step in and make a major correction, which is a very sanitized version of saying what actually happened. They were attacked, kidnapped, and brought into Babylon. Temple was destroyed, Judah was wiped out, and not to exist again until 70 years later, when Cyrus the Persian comes in, and he goes to the Jews and to all the other cultures conquered by Babylon, "What are you doing here? It's time for you to go home." And he helped them restore Judah. And so here, in today's reading, the Jews are acknowledging their sinfulness at that time, which is kind of interesting because today is Yom Kippur. Well, actually, we're in that period of Yom Kippur, I'm sorry. And right after that is Rosh Hashanah. So we're in that period of that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and here we are talking about this powerful reality of the Jews coming to realize that they had sinned in following other gods and everything else. Now, as I said, yesterday was Yom Kippur, but we're in that period of Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. So as we look at this, we see that they're acknowledging that the Lord has done these great things for them, but they didn't listen to the Lord and they chose their own way. And the whole focus there obviously has nothing to do with the fact that they are Jewish. It has everything to do with the fact that all human beings do the same thing. We acknowledge that in our own life. We acknowledge that in the histories. And we acknowledge how much that no matter what we do, we seek to follow Christ, but we also have that inclination to walk another path. And we see that consistently. In light of that, we recognize some of the powerful things that we realize that God is in relationship with us, leading us to follow him because that's where life is. Now, currently, I'm reading an important book by Saint Alphonsus Liguori. It's called Uniformity with God's Will. And he's really talking about the fact, and I've read this several times, really talking about the fact that we acknowledge God's will in our life, and that leads us to happiness and holiness, because when we do that, then we're acknowledging we're in God's world. And so no matter what happens to us, good or bad, if we praise God for it, and a very powerful thing, then we acknowledge that what is happening is by God's hand. Even if God didn't necessarily want it to happen, he allowed it to happen. So it's all happening by God's hand, and that, he said, is the path to holiness. Well, if you think of what that means, and we're looking at that today, it means that we're living in God's world. So if you want to seek happiness, true happiness, you find by acknowledging that you are living in God's world, and by by becoming docile to grace, which is one of the teachings of the church, and not only acknowledging that you're living in God's world, but you acknowledge that everything happens with permission of God, even if he didn't necessarily want it to happen. And therefore, he says, the more you do that, by acknowledging you're in God's world, you're going to be happier because you're not fighting that basic truth. If you choose to live your own will, then what you're doing, he's saying, is that you're trying to live by your standards in God's world. And he says that's not going to work. It's when we acknowledge that this is God's world, and so we allow everything within the context of this being God's world, that we seek to know Christ and to live in Christ. So that's a powerful reality, and that's one of the things he's saying. And what happens? What was the cause of all the problems for the Jews prior to the Babylonian exile and ultimately the Babylonian exile? They did not acknowledge they were in God's world, and they chose to do things their own way. And remember, they got actively involved in real, as it says here, wickedness. A kind of interesting thing, because one of the lines here is talking about the wickedness of human hearts. And as I've told you before about my love of H.P. Lovecraft, well, and as I said earlier in the week, how his whole thing was understanding that if we could believe in infinite good, we could also believe in infinite evil. And he wrote about that. So if you understand that, then you understand the wickedness of our hearts can go down a very wicked path. Why? Because we have that true freedom to be able to do what we want, but that freedom can lead us down really bad paths or it can lead us down really good paths. There is a greater effort of following down really good paths because that involves following God's will as opposed to our own will. There is less effort needed to walk down really bad paths, but those bad paths will lead us to really awful places. And we've heard horrible stories. And now, as you know, I like to listen overnight, or if I don't hear him overnight, I like to listen to him by podcast, is Lionel, who comes out of WABC in New York, 77 WABC. And he's talking about how this AI thing could be the end of humanity because of that exact principle plays itself out, except you have a computer that can design itself, that can code itself, and that exact scenario can actually reflect an intense amount of evil upon humanity that could be devastating to humanity. So we recognize that even by human hands, even though maybe not be human, you can see evil walk down. You can see in a really bad path of evil. God gave us this freedom to be able to do what we want, with the understanding that we can truly love God when we choose to love God. But that means we have to have the choice not to love God, but to love ourselves instead. And so this is one of the things that Lionel is warning about. Our whole reality with AI could walk down a path where that freedom to choose away from God and maybe choose to worship whatever is in AI. I don't use AI that much. I actually don't use it at all. Just very few things on research. But this could be a reflective of the amount of evil, these are my words, that humanity can create. And that he says this is a very scary reality. It also brings up something that he's brought up. His wife runs Lynn's Warriors, and so she works against human trafficking, especially in regards to children and safety of children and things like that. And he's bringing up a reality that I have complained about for a long time, and that is you have the virtual world and then you have the real world. Well, you can do absolutely evil things in the virtual world, and none of it is a crime because no one is actually affected because it's the virtual world. But one of the things that I always brought out is even though the action happens in the virtual world, the choices and the decisions are made in the real world. And that has tremendous impact on how we live our life, which brings us back to choosing to do God's will. We'll be right back right after this. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast.
Are you looking for guidance on how to live a purposeful and transformed life? Look no further than Romans 12, a chapter in the New Testament that offers practical wisdom for believers. Romans 12 begins with a powerful call to offer our bodies as living sacrifices to God, urging us to renew our minds and align them with His will. This chapter highlights the importance of humility, using our gifts for the benefit of others, and exercising genuine love. It teaches us to be diligent in serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, persevering in tribulation, and being devoted to prayer. But it doesn't stop there. Romans 12 also teaches us to live in harmony with others, extending kindness and hospitality even to our enemies. It urges us to overcome evil with good and leave vengeance to God. So if you're seeking guidance on how to live a life of love, humility, and service, dive into Romans 12. Let its practical wisdom transform your life. Romans 12, a chapter that offers a roadmap to living a purposeful and transformed Christian life. Available now in the New Testament. Get your copy today. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back, and we've been talking about this whole understanding of choosing to do God's will is the source of happiness, and accepting God's will as it happens is the road to happiness. Choosing to do our world outside of what God is looking for us to do is the way to unhappiness. And this is a teaching that we find from St. Alphonsus Liguori, among other saints as well. And as I said, I'm reading from Uniformity with God's Will. And this is all rooted back to Baruch, who's teaching how the people come to the realization that they created great evil by choosing to turn away from God. But there's something that we want to look at, because there's a fascinating story that came out from Pope Leo this week. And this is something also I've been speaking about for years, because Pope Leo has talked about if you're going to be pro-life, then that pro-life ethic is much bigger than being against abortion.
And I've been fighting that not fighting that statement, fighting on behalf of that statement for a long time. It's really great he brings that out, because you find people who are anti-abortion but pro-death penalty, and they call that being pro-life. And one of the interesting things they will always say, and this actually sends me right through the roof, but anyway, one of the interesting things they always say is they say, oh, but we are concerned with innocent life, and that's why we support the death penalty, because the death penalty goes after guilty life. Well, I've never, ever agreed with that argument. A long time ago, there used to be an organization called Seminarians for Life, later became Human Life International. And they were, always anti-abortion but pro-death penalty. And I remember having an argument back and forth with them by the internet, in the early days back then, by the internet. And they will always do that whole argument of, well, we're here for innocent life, but that's guilty life. But I thought, and considering this was in the seminary, and I'm now a priest for 32 years, this is true, that there really is no such thing as innocent life versus guilty life, because all of us have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So therefore, to turn around and say, well, those people deserve the death penalty and not the mercy of God, but we deserve, but we only want to be focused on those who deserve the mercy of God. According to Catholic theology, no one deserves the mercy of God. All of us receive the mercy by his free gift. So that doesn't make any sense. And so this is one of the things that the Pope is looking at, is the fact that the Pope is coming out and talking about all these powerful truths of, we understand God's will, we understand the choice to do freedom, and we understand God's mercy, we understand God's love. All of that comes together, and we are agents of extending that to all people, regardless of who those people are. You understand? So that's why we don't believe in the death penalty. The one who spoke out against the death penalty, everyone puts it on Francis. It was Pope John Paul II. He said that the conditions for which the death penalty is acceptable virtually don't exist. I forget the exact words, but basically virtually don't exist today. And that was his position. And then Pope Francis built upon that and said, no, there are no conditions for which we can declare support of the death penalty. So we have that. So being anti-abortion is not necessarily alone being pro-life. It is being pro-life, which is the entire pro-life ethic. And Jesus brought that out. When I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And people will always bring out that, those, I don't want to get into the political, at least too far in the weeds of the political, but always bring out these talking points, and there I won't mention a party, talking points that refute that and say, no, you can't turn away from that. But one of the things that I do always like to bring out, Jesus was talking about us doing this. This is something Dorothy Day brought up a lot. Not necessarily the government, it's us. Now, obviously, the government works to do these things, which is fine. But then there are people that saying the government should not do these things, but someone else should. That's also a discussion. The bishops are always in support of government policies that support the poor. They're always down that path. And then there are others that say, no, we don't need government policies that support the poor. We need other policies, not necessarily government related, that support the poor, but requirement to support the poor is essential. And there are others that are a combination of both. So you see all of that come in. But when you get into this strict argument that the government, that no one should do anything, they're all lazy and they're all this and they're all that. Well, let me tell you that is really a sinful attitude to have. I mean, there are some, obviously, there are some who are very rich who are lazy, but they have money, so no one needs to do anything about it. But there are those, yeah, of course there are, but there are a lot of people who would like to work, who would like to get a job, but they can't. And then there are others that are caring for their children, and so they're not able to get a job, but they're listed as being, oh, well, they're lazy and stuff. Well, who's going to take care of their children? And no one is taking care of them while they take care of their children. You see, all of that comes out. And we have these, if we're going to be pro-life, then we're going to look at that bigger picture, not just this picture of just focused on abortion, which is very common in the so-called pro-life movement, which is what the Pope is addressing. Very fascinating. And it's very common among certain bishops where they focus just on the pro-life, or just on being against abortion, and they don't care about anything else. And that's ridiculous. The pro-life ethic is everything. And when you fall down some of those paths and embrace a political movement that really isn't Catholic, but has a connection to some Catholic values like being against abortion, you're really walking down a path that's really not too far from idolatry, because you're focused on something that the Lord does not approve, which is being focused away from things that he says these are essential parts of the Catholic life. So you're walking down a path that the Lord does not approve, yet you're calling it, this is what it means to be a good Catholic. No. Being a good Catholic means to live in such a way that you recognize you are agents of agents of the kingdom of God. I had a situation recently where I was asked to interview an author, and I won't go into who the author was, but I brought out to the agent who asked me, I said, well, we've kind of had arguments before, and a very good guy. He was very, very happy. The author was very happy that I responded to him. I disagreed with him. He's very happy they took the time to respond, because obviously, just like when people do this with me, he read I read his article, and I took time to respond, which says a lot as well. Anytime someone responds to me, even if they disagree, that means they read the article. Unless, of course, they didn't read the article. You can see that as well. If someone makes some response, you go, well, obviously the person didn't read what I said. But I still said, one of the rules I maintain is if I'm going to have an interview, it's going to be friendly. I'm not into gotcha journalism. I'm not into attacking someone and being able to put the whole interview out there saying, see, that's how great a person I am that I can attack people like this. I don't do that. And if there is someone who people want me to interview, and this was not the case in this author, but if there's someone that people want me to interview, if I know that this will turn into an antagonistic interview, I won't do it, because that's not the way I operate. And there are people that approached me, and like I said, this author wasn't one of them. I just wanted to make sure that the agent understood that we've had, our disagreements in the past. But people have approached me, say, I want you to consider interviewing such and such a person. No, there's no way I'm going to interview such and such a person, because such and such a person is going to be, it's going to be an antagonistic interview, and I don't do those. And, and if you want to know who, I'm not going to give you any names, but anyone who despised Pope Francis, who rejected him as Pope, who is what is known as a sedevacanist, who believes that there is no Pope, anyone who is totally embracing the Latin Mass to the exclusion